The floor is yours, Dwight.
All right. Thank you very much. So first thing I want to say is thank you guys for attending. And let me go ahead and get started by sharing a screen here. And let's sure it's the right screen. Can you guys see my screen okay? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. PowerPoint decided to go into presentation mode on the wrong screen. Let's try it that way. Okay, even better. So again, thank you for coming out this evening and listening for a talk on the chatbots by Microsoft and the Bot Framework. And so what I'm going to attempt to show tonight is how to build some chatbots in a very easy flowing pattern, in a very easy flowing way. So I like to entitle this the Microsoft Lewis Chatbots Made Easy. And so with that, the agenda will be, first we'll talk about exactly what chatbots are, and then I'll introduce you to Lewis if you've never heard of Language Understanding Intelligent Service and where that fits into the realm of AI and chatbot space. And then we'll talk about the tools that you need in order to start developing bots that you want to use with this framework. And then we'll go and actually build a bot, build a couple of bots, and you kind of can get a feel for what the experience would be like. And if you want to follow along, you're more than welcome to do so. And then afterwards, I'll give you some call to action steps, some things you could do after this in order to really make your bots become more entertaining and more interactive. And again, welcome. My name is Dwight Goins, and I will put up my contact information toward the end of this talk. So if you want to reach me, you're more than welcome to. But my profile, my background's pretty simple. I'm a developer by skill set and trade set. I've worked in the programming world and industry as a software engineer for over 20 years. And I've attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, did a stint at Georgia Tech for a quick second. I didn't actually finish there at those places, but did do some online college experiences where I got my Bachelor of Science. I won't name the school because that's kind of another story. But after that, I went ahead and started working in various different fields. I've worked in the government. I've worked at hospices, and for example, in Millersville, Georgia, actually worked at one of the hospitals down in Middle Georgia, and then had some nice experiences in Warner Robins, Georgia, working at the Air Force Base headquarters reserve as a civilian and contractor. So that was pretty fun. And now I'm currently down in South Florida. I'm working with JM Family, where I lead a team of developers for Southeast Toyota Finance.
Works against people's own pockets. Therefore, these anomalies that you claim to...
Okay. Somebody was talking there. If you could go on
Robert's too timing on us.
If you could please go on mute, that would help. And so, my background has been pretty well centered around in the industry. Okay, so with that, let's get started. That's a little bit about me. So what are chatbots? So here's an interesting picture of what we refer to as a robot sitting in front of a computer with a headset that's automating some conversation. That's not exactly what we call a chatbot. What a chatbot really is a set of servers that are running in some data center that basically run some automated service, some web service, some RESTful service. And this service processes text in some form or fashion. And what's interesting about the processing of text is that it allows us to pass in languages. So think of chatbots as services that run on these servers, very powerful servers, that allow us to build a new platform of how we build out applications. This platform is what we like to refer to as conversation as a platform. So these services that conversate with one another and you. If you think about what a bot is, if you've ever interacted with one, that's when you've gone to your car insurance website and you're looking up quotes, and all of a sudden there's a virtual agent that pops up that says, "Can I help you?" And you start chatting with this virtual agent. Well, behind the scenes, believe it or not, a lot of times the first few commands of that virtual agent is really a bot. And then, you know, they ask you some information, typically some type of question and answer type of thing where they ask you, you know, who you are, you know, what do you need, what are you looking for? And then behind the scenes, the automation typically routes you to some human on the other end, maybe by way of a phone or maybe through this chat system. But I guarantee you that first interaction is some type of automated service that's processing your text and your conversation. Another thing I'd like to bring to your attention is when we talk about conversation as a platform, we're also talking about this new paradigm in development. So for the past 20 plus years, we've been developing what we refer to as two-dimensional space, meaning we've been developing in an X and Y, up and down, left and right. Because if you look at your screen is flat, but it has an up and down, left and right. And we put pixels on those screens to provide nice, pretty pictures. And the applications, for the most part, has always been about that two-dimensional space. Well, with the advent of augmented reality and mixed reality and things like the HoloLens device, versions 1 and 2, things like the Magic Leap device that's out, right? Things like being able to take your cell phone and kind of look around things in an augmented reality space. That's what we refer to as a 3D platform, because it's actually 3 dimensions now. It's of course up and down, left and right, but it's also in and out. Well, chatbots, believe it or not, go the other way in the sphere of platforms. And they're all about this one-dimensional plane, where what you're doing is there's no up and down. It's really linear. It's just simply going forward and back. And the idea of a 1D development is really conversation. Some words are sent into the system processes those words and those phrases and returns back some text back out. So it's a really one-dimensional plane of how we're working with development and frameworks. And that's the idea of a chatbot. So building a chatbot should be fairly easy if you think about websites, because if you didn't have the user interface of a browser, if you go back to when the websites were first created, right, and you had these bulletin boards and really you just had these terminals that allowed you to link to other pages, right? Even though the terminal was something you could see, if you remove the terminal for a second, if you remove that green screen or the browser and had a mechanism that could talk the words back to you, that would be similar to, you know, a chat bot. Right, this idea where you could hit a website that had text, and then that website text would be spoken back to you. In essence, that's a chatbot. But if you think about developing web pages, the question becomes, how difficult is it for you to build logic to understand everyone's phrases? Everyone has a certain way they speak, because they learned it through TV, they learned it through their parents, they learned it through their culture, through their upbringing, through their friends, people on the street, right? And in movies, of course. And these different vernaculars, these different idealisms, these different ways in which you say certain phrases is very difficult as a developer for you to try and build to or develop towards. So understanding that means that if you were trying to take a website and figure out what the intention of a user was through just words, you would be coding for years. So we need a system that can understand natural languages and natural phrases. Well, welcome to the world of something called natural language processing. Natural language processing is a machine learning practice that uses some very interesting mathematical algorithms to kind of group together words, group together phrases, figure out the semantics of that phrase, figure out the syntax, figure out the ordering, and actually break apart a sentence in such a way where the computer can understand the intention of the sentence, the actual nouns of the sentence, also known as the entities, right? What person, place, or thing are we talking about? All from the utterance. So the utterance is the phrase that was spoken. And that's exactly what Microsoft LUIS is. Microsoft LUIS is a language understanding intelligence service that lives in the realm of the Azure Cognitive Services space that allows you to take advantage of exactly that. People can speak, or you can type phrases into the system, and it can recognize those phrases and understand actions based off of intents and apply those actions to a particular thing, person, place, or thing, or noun, such that if someone were to say, hey, can you please turn on the lights upstairs? That phrase might turn into turn on the bedroom lights. Things of that nature. So as a developer, if we want to build bots that really take advantage of text and processing languages, there's some tools that we need under our belt in order to do this. So one of those tools is something called the Bot Framework. Microsoft has been working on the Bot Framework for, I don't know, maybe about 6 or 7 years at this point. And they're in version like 4 or 5 right now. And the Bot Framework can be found on GitHub, and I'll show you the link in just a second. And you can download the SDK, and it provides pretty much the examples and everything you need to get started building a bot. But you don't have to actually start there. You can actually start in Azure, which is what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to build the bot in Azure, how to test it, how to play around with it, how to set breakpoints, and eventually how to get more complex and add things like natural language processing to the bot. One thing that you need in your arsenal as a developer when building these bots is called the Bot Framework Emulator. The Bot Framework Emulator is a desktop app that runs on your system that allows you to connect to local bots. Remember, they're just nothing more than RESTful services that process text, right? So it can connect to a service that runs locally, or it can connect to services that run in, say, Azure or other cloud providers. And all you really need to do is link it up, pass in any app ID and secret that that bot needs or that service needs to connect. And then you can test against the bot.
The internet's not working. Tia said it. I know.
I'm on a video right now. Can you come back? And if the internet's not working, how can I be working?
Wow.
Are you guys still there? Is the internet working?
It's working for you.
We're here.
I'm still here.
Which is not working.
All right, go ask Auntie if she could fix your switch.
She said she go ask you.
All right, tell them I'm busy right now and come back in a minute. Thank you. Say bye.
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 Working at home. So in any case, as far as the Bot Emulator allows you to connect up to any bot service. And as you connect to that bot service, you can set breakpoints, and you can, test that service, run anything you want against that service, and of course do live debugging and get feedback as that bot runs. Okay, so the Bot Emulator is like keys, the main arsenal in your toolkit that you use in order to build it out and make sure you understand what's going on. And last but not least, VisualStudio.net. Now that's optional, because I will show you, you can actually develop these bots right in your browser, right inside of Azure. You do not need Visual Studio to build these bots. However, if you do use Visual Studio, your life becomes a little bit easier with some of the nice cool features and IntelliSense and things that you have inside of Visual Studio, especially if you want to run the bot locally. Okay, so Visual Studio is an optional piece, but it's definitely something that you could use in order to build out these Microsoft bots from the Bot Framework. So all of that's preliminary stuff, just to kind of make sure everybody's up on the same page. And I'll kind of go through a quick summary, and then we'll bounce into actually building a bot. So what is a chatbot? Well, again, a chatbot is a conversation as a platform service that allows you to build this RESTful API that runs in Azure, that's where you want, that processes text. That's great, but what can we do with processing text? Well, depending on how advanced and complex you want it to get, you can use an engine like a natural language processing engine to build out a chatbot that understands various different idioms, various different phrases based off of culture, based off of different languages, and you can run that through what's called the language understanding intelligence service inside of Azure as well to get back intents and entities and kind of understand exactly what was said to your bot if you don't want to hard code all of that yourself. So we can build very complex communications or conversations as a platform systems utilizing this bot and the bot framework. So with that, let's go ahead and build one. Yay. All right. So I am going to open up a browser here. And to build a bot, there are a couple of things that you should start with. Number one, you need to have an Azure account. So if you don't have one, you can go ahead and go into portal.azure.com, or you can go to live.com and you can create an account, which means you typically have to create either a subscription or add a subscription or use one of the free trials. Once you have an account, next thing you need to do is go to portal.azure.com. Choose that account that you'd like to use to log in. And then depending on your account, if you have different directories that you belong to, you may need to switch to that directory that has the subscriptions that you want to use by clicking on your name here and selecting that directory that you're interested in. And then within this space here, right, within this Azure environment, we have the ability of creating what we refer to as a web bot. But the first thing I would recommend that you do is you create a resource group. And that resource group becomes like a container that you can use that you could stick all your bots inside of. So I'm going to come over here to the big plus sign here. I'm going to go create a resource. And I'm going to type in resource group because I want to first create a container that's going to hold all of my Azure resources, more for management purposes and maintenance. Okay, so I will choose the subscription that I have for my directory, and then I'll go ahead and create a, we'll call this the DNG Meetup resource group. And I'll choose the East US as a location where I want my resources to go. And I'll click on Review and Create. All right, so just like that, my resource group is created. Of course, I could have also done this by way of writing some PowerShell script or using the Azure command line snippets that are available to run this from a PowerShell command line tool, if that's what I want, or through a shell, a Corn shell bash script, if I want to do that. So now that I have my resource group created, the next thing I want to do now is create a web app bot. So I'm going to go back here and go create a resource. And this time, I'm going to come down to the AI and machine learning piece, right? Because the web bots can be found in this category. And notice here, there's a web app bot. You also have the ability of clicking on quick start and tutorials if you want to do that. But I recommend you just go ahead and create the web app bot. And this is going to build the environment out in the Azure environment in order to allow me to actually build out this chat bot in order to, build some conversation as a platform design that I want to do. So the first bot we're going to create is an echo bot, right? And this is just a basic bot that's going to allow us to write some code to listen for some stuff to come in and then just regurgitate the information that came in, just spit it right back out, right? Just like an echo system would do. So first thing you want to do is name it, let's say, put your prefix in front of it. Okay. Next thing you want to do is determine who's paying for this bot. So in this case, that's your subscription. And then where this bot is going to reside. And so we'll go and we'll do the GNG Meetup resource group that I just created. And here we have a location for it. And then we have a pricing tier that we can choose. There's different pricing options that's available here. The S1 is just fine. I think it's up to 1,000 messages. Or is it 10,000? I think it's 1,000 per minute or something that's allowed or something like that. You can view the pricing details here by clicking on the link and what's available. And notice whatever name that you give the bot here by default, that becomes the name of your app service, and eventually the URL name. But if you don't want that, here's the option to change the actual URL endpoint of that bot. If you don't like it being, in this case, DNG EchoBot, you're more than welcome to change the name. All right, the next thing you could do is you could choose what's called a bot template. So this allows us to choose different languages that are supported out the box. So right now it's C# and Node, but it also allows us to choose, for example, this idea of a basic bot or the Echo bot. Okay. It also allows us links to go in and integrate with the Lewis app that we'll come back and do in a little while, and any Q&A bots that we'll talk about, but we won't implement or do anything with Q&A at this point. So for now, for your first bot, I just want you to select EchoBot here. That's fine, and click on OK. And the EchoBot, again, allows us just to be a service that whatever text you sends in, it sends back out. And the reason why I want to talk about the EchoBot is because I want to break down the design of how bots work with these things called dialogue and these things called terms. Okay, so keep it very simple here. All right, for application insights, I don't need to get charged for that, so I'll turn off application insights. If this is the first time you're doing it, your app service plan may be blank and empty. So what you need to do is come over here to your app service plan and click on create a new app service plan, and just give it a name, choose a location. I typically like to keep the locations all synced up because different regions have different pricing and different regions have different capabilities. So if you have an app service plan in Central US, but you're thinking you're getting billed based off the Eastern US, you may get a little confused there. So keep everything in sync and you shouldn't have an issue there. All right, so we'll click on OK for that. And now, once you pretty much set up your settings here, click on Create, and that will go out and initialize the environment, create the service, create the app plan, add this resource to the resource group as for management purposes. And it takes about a minute or two, but a notification will show up here that asks you, do you want to add it to your dashboard, which you could to easily find it. Or you can just click on a link that allows you to go directly to that bot. So if you give it a second, we'll let it create the bot. And I'll pause right here to see if there are any questions on the floor or maybe in the chat window that someone may want to ask at this point.
I don't see anything at this point.
Okay. All right, very good. So at that point, you see here that the chatbot was successfully created. So if we come over here, go to resource, notice here it kind of helps me. There's a little path here that guides me along the way on what I need to do next, right? So for example, if I want to get more fancy with the bot, I can click on design guidelines for planning out my bot, which is always a good thing to understand the do's and don'ts when you build a bot and kind of understand what it is that you're working with. So always start with the design guidelines, and it kind of steps you through. Once you've figured out the design and the naming and where everything is going to live, then you can go into actually to build your bot. So you can actually start coding away and writing source code. And after you've built it, of course, the next thing you want to do is test and keep testing. You want to add a little bit to your code, then you test. Add a little bit more, then you test, right? This is back and forth iteration of development experience that you have when working with the bot. And once you've gotten to a satisfaction level or a criteria where you're ready to start releasing and publishing your bot, right? That's the next step in your phase, and you can easily publish your bot right here in Azure. All right. And the connect and evaluate sections we'll talk about a little bit later on when we get to the call to action. But again, this first part is really about how do we get this thing set up and how do we kind of understand what's happening behind the scenes. So the first thing I'd like you to do, if you're following along with me, is notice here on the left-hand side, we have some items that we can select, right? We can look at like the activity of the bot and what's been happening, control who has access to the bot in the case of clients that want to call it. Give it tags to if we have a bunch of resources and we need to search for them. Tags are very good. And here we have the ability of something called build and something called test. Let's click on test in web chat. And this is the first real scenario of us seeing the bot in action. And what's going to happen here is a graphical window in our browser is going to pop up that allows me to actually interact with the service. So the very first thing that you see that happened here was we actually initiated the service and connected to it. So upon this first connection of the service responded, hello and welcome. Okay, now remember the purpose of the echo bot. Whatever I type and send to it, it just sends me back the exact same thing, well, with a little echo message in front of it. So here, I'm going to just say, hi. And notice when I type in hi, the words hi go to the service processes that text, and then it echoes back simply the words hi. This is pretty clear example of what this bot does. Whatever you type, it sends the data back, okay? Now, remember how I said that we have certain tools that we can use in order to, test out this bot. One of those tools was called the Bot Emulator, right? But we can also test it here. And guess what? We can also develop right here as well. So let's show you a little bit about the browser experience first. And then we'll take a step back and I'll take this bot that we created that has some very basic code, and I'll open it up in Visual Studio and show you the local experience. And then we'll talk about the emulator and how we connect the emulator to our local bot. And then I'll show you how to connect it to Azure. I won't actually do that part, but I'll show you how. And then once we've done that, we can move into some more complex bot development. All right, fair enough? All right, so that was a very easy introduction to the Echo bot. So now I'm going to click on the build link over here. And the build mechanism allows me to actually get to the source code of that first bot template that we just created. We have the ability of downloading the source code by clicking on this bot link right here, and it takes a minute, but a zip file will get created. And this is actually how you would now use this source file inside of a pipeline, such as an Azure DevOps pipeline, or use some type of code repository, right? So you first create your bot, you get it all set up, and then you basically download the source code of that first bot, and then you extract that code, and then you could check it in to any repository that you want. And then from that point on, the code now lives in that repository. And then as you publish to this bot, that version of the code is always here that you can always download again if that's what you want to do. All right, so this is just kind of a quick way of getting to your source code without you actually seeing it. All right, so I'm going to click on download. And as you can see here, a zip file gets created. I'm going to click on save. All right, very good. Now that's saved out to my local machine. We'll open that in just a minute. For now, I want to show you that you have the ability of actually making changes right here in your browser. So this link at the very bottom, it says Open Online Code Editor, allows us to open our code right here in the editor window. Now this does take, last time I tried it, took about 3 or 4 minutes to run. So we'll kind of let that spin up here. Oh, maybe not. Hey, that was fast. Okay, last time it took me about 3 or 4 minutes. This time it was right away. Take that, Bam, my internet is working. Okay, I shouldn't have called his name. He's gonna be running in here.
I know, he's gonna come in and see what's going on, yeah. Hey, Bam!
Okay, so here is the Echo bot. So let's talk a little bit about the design and structure of the bot. So this is nothing more than your ASP.NET MVC type pattern. Okay, it's just a MVC web app. Okay, but it's an interesting web app that has some bells and whistles fine-tuned specifically for processing text and just processing your bot activity, whatever that means to you. The first thing we have is we have a controller, and the controllers themselves are derived from a bot controller base. Okay, and so if you're familiar with the MVC pattern, then you know everything's based off a controller. A controller can have routes and have these attributes applied to it to make it do certain things, right? And then within the controller, we have the model and we have the view. But if you think about a bot, remember, it's one-dimensional. There is no XY plane. There's no graphics to it per se. So there really isn't a view in this pattern. So that's what this controller kind of does. It just says, I'm not paying attention to any views. There's no concept of a view. There may be a concept of a model, right, which is your data source mechanism that attaches or binds to your logic. but in this case, there's typically no concept of a view. All right, so that's maybe something that you don't see here. Another thing that you'll notice here is that there's this folder called bots. Now this is where your real hard code is. It's inside of a class called a bot. And a bot is nothing more than what we refer to as an activity handler. Now, to understand this design of the bots and how the bot framework works, you have to think about how conversations work. So think about, a regular conversation. You meet somebody, well, COVID has changed everything now. But before COVID, think about how a conversation would typically work, right? Let's say you go to a grocery store and you accidentally bump into somebody. That accidental bump actually initiated the conversation. It's like, bump, excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry. And what happens is there are dialogues that take place. And for good conversations, you typically have to wait your turn. So there are turns in this dialogue. First, it's your turn, then it's the other person's turn. Okay, so when we talk about dialogues, it's all about a conversational state with a dialogue with whose turn it is. So that's what you'll kind of see when we work within this framework. We'll see that there are turns. Is it the system's turn to process the message? Or is it the client's turn to send you in? Or is it your turn to respond? Right? It's this back and forth thing that happens here. All right. And the activity handler is just basically the basic class that can handle those turns. All right. So those turns, whose turn is it, has context associated with it, such as, is it a response? Is it a reply? What's the environment? What's the any parameters that may have been passed in, the data, in this case, the text that was passed in, and you can control the responses that go back in the turn. And that's why you'll see things like a turn context. All right. And so you can change the context to make it do anything that you want it to do. But in the example that we have on the screen, this is a very basic design where the very first thing that happens is your system gets initiated, or in this case, the conversation gets initiated. Somebody bumped into the computer, in lack of a better word. And so in this case, that initiation, you don't actually see the initiation method here, but what you do see is a method the initiation calls, which is called, hey, someone just wanted into your conversation, so we're going to add that member into your conversation. So this is the on members added event, in lack of a better word. And so this is just one of the first things that happened, right? Someone is joining your conversation, which means that, yes, you can have multiple people join the conversation. Now, that's a much more complex design, but it's very doable and very possible here in this framework. So in this case, for every member that gets added to the conversation, this method gets called. So here, what I'm going to do is just show you what the development experience is. So let's say the name of my bot is Sheba, because I love Sheba. I'm going to say, hi, my name is Sheba, comma, you can say whatever you want. I'll just repeat. But, okay. And in this scenario, the welcome text is just going to introduce the person that has just joined into the conversation. And in this case, they're going to use a little bit of a model object to kind of verify that whoever's added to this conversation is actually not already there. And that's what they're doing a check for here. And then at that point in time, they're going to take the turn context and they're going to say, we're going to now send a response back using a send activity. If anybody's ever done any Windows workflow development from 6, 7 years ago, maybe more like 10 years ago, this is very similar in design with the idea of activities and context and maintaining state between activities. If you've ever done any Windows workflow, it's the exact principles behind the scenes. Different classes, but same principle. All right, so with that, here we're going to send back the response, and the response is going to be created inside of what we refer to as a message object. And a message is just exactly what you could think it is. It's just some text message. And we're going to use the message factory class to create that text message that gets sent back. Now, the reason why it's sent back here twice, or you see it, these two parameters, is because the bot framework makes no assumptions about how and where this bot runs, right? It could run in Azure, or it might run on a device like the Cortana device. And in the case of, if it runs on like an audio device, then you may need it to actually speak the results as opposed to display the results. Because remember, we're talking about one-dimensional programming. All right, so now, yes.
Quick question.
Yes.
The if statement right there above the send activity async is just a little bit misleading for me. I was hoping you could clarify, why are we having to make sure that it's not, why the member that was added is not the recipient? It's just kind of curious.
Yes, so right here.
Yep.
So in this scenario is not supporting multiple people joining the conversation. This is one person that's joined the conversation, and all this is just saying is make sure I don't know who they are.
Okay.
Right. That's all this is really saying.
Got it.
Right?
Oh, okay. So it's not one of the existing members that were already added. Oh, okay.
Yes.
It's kind of backwards. Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
No worries. All right. So then this is, again, is one of the first things that get called through the design here. And so this is really just an initiation phase of saying, hey, someone's entering into the conversation. They haven't sent you anything other than, hey, I want to join this conversation. Okay. And that's what this represents. Now over here, this one now represents a more generic turn that says, whenever a message comes in, it's your turn to do something, right? And so this is generically, every time I get a message, do something. And so in this case, for the echo bot, we're saying every time we do something, we're just going to return back whatever text that was sent in with the words echo in front of it. And we're going to send that response back appropriately. And again, the idea being here is that this text mechanism is one for actually sending the raw text back, and the other one is for either display or for audio, depending on which parameter that you use here. All right, so you can actually speak the text back if this bot is, and when you say speak it back, what winds up happening is instead of if you choose not to actually return text in the body, the speaking of the text would actually, I believe, return the audio portion of it. So audio devices know how to play it back as opposed to it coming back as text, right? So it's just a different mechanism for a different type of device. All right. Next piece of this puzzle that I'd like to show you here is the startup. So I probably should have started here, but it's okay. So the environment of how the bot itself loads up into memory, because remember, it's still ASP.NET, right? Or ASP.NET Core, to be a little bit more specific. It still requires that whole ASP.NET Core engine to kind of start and get loaded. And which is good, because if you know how that engine gets started, you know there are all kinds of configurations that you can add to it. So in this case, what the startup class is, it provides you different places where you can configure it to load different engines and different services that you may want to communicate with later. And this is very important when we get into the Lewis piece, because Lewis is a whole nother service. So the idea of your bot is going to take the initial request that comes in of text. You're going to, excuse me, you're going to do some pre-processing or something to it, but you're going to package that up and send it to another service, in this case, a Lewis service. So in order to configure the Lewis service, you would come over here and you add something called a Lewis recognizer into your configuration, and you just kind of create it with whatever app ID and secret that you need that I'll show you later, and then load it up so it's available throughout all of your different bots, because you can have more than one bot, right? And then you can just kind of use that Lewis service as you see fit through different message turns or different bots that you might have. All right, and that's what this startup is for. And one more piece that you need to know here about the design. All these other files are just helper files. Again, I'm just showing you the things you really need to know. Is the, oh, it's not here because it wouldn't be in this one. But the next file is the app settings JSON file that I'll show you when we get to the downloaded version. All right, so once we've saved these files, so there's no special saving you need to do. It's automatically saved for you as you write the code. If you want to build it right here, you got to go into the build CMD. So you click on the build CMD and you just run the build. And hopefully that runs just as fast as it took to load up. And then once the build finishes, the next thing you do is you go into the deploy CMD once that finishes, and you kind of like redeploy it in the Azure system. And then you can come back over to your test web client and you can see whatever changes that you made to your code. And so again, you don't need Visual Studio. You can do it all right here in the browser, and you can make changes to it and kind of play with it appropriately. If you guys can excuse me for 1 minute, I need some water.
We don't usually have an intermission, but here we are.
Yep, it's beer time.
I'm out of water. I'm too far from the kitchen.
You need a mini refrigerator in your.
I know. Hey, Natalie.
Hey, Dave.
How are you?
Good. I just got out of a meeting.
Oh, nice. Natalie, do you
What's
know
this?
Barca by any chance?
I don't believe I do. Hi, Barca.
Hey, how are you?
Natalie, Dwight, and I,
Good.
one other person have a NetTech, so.
You're catching up to how many companies you own.
Just
It's
a
a
couple.
competition
That's
between
it.
me and Dave.
Oh, I lost a long time ago.
No, I don't know about that, Dave.
Oh, yeah. Well, how many do you? You can't even count them all, can you?
Who knows? Yeah.
Hey, Dwight. Yeah, Natalie's here too, so.
Natalie.
Hey, Dwight.
Hey, how's
All
everything?
right. I'm shutting off.
All right. Okay, we got to get a little turnout here. All right, so after we've built it, you can come over here and click on the deploy command, click on run, and it will go out and deploy it. And while that continues to do that, I'll come back over to my DNG Echo bot. All right, very good. It completed successfully. And now if I come back to test in my web chat, you'll see that the introduction should say, you know, the bot's name now that I just added. And here you go. Okay. And so really it's the two basic methods that we're talking about here is, again, this members added method, which is kind of like the initiation, and the on message async method. Okay. So this basically runs every single time whenever somebody sends you something. And this runs only one time when everything is getting started up. All right. So those are the two places where you really code. Of course, there are other message activities you can have. There's a on before, there's an on after. There's different things that you could do at different events in the whole bot framework pipeline. But these are the two typical ones that you write the majority of your code with. All right, so now with all that being said, let's bounce over to the desktop experience and talk about the same code from visualstudio.net and talk about the emulator. And then we'll take a quick second to talk a little bit about Lewis. And before I get too lost in the time, Dave and Barca, how much time do I actually have?
So it's scheduled for it to end at 8, but
Okay.
we usually never go till 8. What we try to do is it usually goes till 7:30, is with Q&A and all that stuff. So you've got plenty of time.
Okay, you guys say that, but I can talk. Okay, very good. So if you remember, we downloaded this bot, and for those that kind of attended a little bit later, the way you can get to that bot is by clicking on the build here and clicking on download bot source code. And again, the way we got to this bot in the first place was inside of our Azure portal. What we did was we came over here and we created a resource, and I selected AI machine learning and web app bot, gave it a name, and voila, we had a bot, right? And so once we had that bot, we could download the source code, and that source code downloaded to my downloads directory. I believe this is the bot right here. So here, I'll go ahead and extract this bot to the same folder as his name. And just like that, this provides the whole platform and scenario that we need. Project template and solution that we need to open it up in Visual Studio. So this is everything that we need in order to interact here. All right, very good. So here's my bot solution in Visual Studio. And when you use the Visual Studio solution that was generated and packaged for me through Azure, we have this app settings JSON file here. And what's important about this app settings JSON file? Well, this app settings winds up being the app ID and secret that you need to communicate with the bot. See, while we were in Azure, all that stuff was kind of taken care of us for us within the Azure internal mechanisms, right? It was still there, so you can actually see this information if I go back to the portal here. Down here in, is it configuration or all app settings? I always forget which one here. Maybe it was configuration. API management, app settings. Okay, I won't waste time, but it's somewhere here in the bot where I thought it was under all app service settings here. It's probably a tab or something I'm missing, where you could see all of those key value pairs that you would see in your app settings JSON file. They show up here in the browser as well, okay? So we didn't really have to worry about that because that was all kind of done for us behind the scenes. But now when we download it to our local machine here, now it's something that we have to pay closer attention to, right? Because now these settings are now local, and if anybody gets a hold of them, then all someone needs are these two values, and they can start calling your service. So this is where you start getting into the conversation of Vault, Azure Vault, where you don't want to stick these values here. You probably want to stick them in Vault and then have some mechanism read them from Vault and so on and so forth. All right, but that's not really for me to show here. It's really something that you would add in the pipeline if you're using Azure DevOps to automate it through a DevOps pipeline. But you do need this when we want to work with this bot and use it with the Bot Framework Emulator. All right, so we'll come back to this page in just a second. I'm going to come over here to Startup and again show you, again, this is the same startup file you saw earlier, where we have configurations that we can add that we're going to eventually revisit when we talk about Lewis. We have the same controllers that are there, and we have the same Echo bot that's here. Okay, make this font a little bit bigger for you. Okay, so here you see it's the same echoes, the same on message activity, so same code, nothing's changed there. So now, how do we test locally? Because again, this is just an ASP.NET Core website, so all we have to do is run the website and then connect our emulator up. Where do you get the emulator from? So the emulator can be found here. Maybe it's here. So the emulator can be found here under in GitHub, under github.com/Microsoft Bot Framework Emulator, and go to the Releases tab, and this allows you to get the latest version of the Bot Framework. You can download it. It's fairly quick download, and when you install it, it installs and looks something similar to this tool here. If you're interested in where to get the Bot Framework itself, SDK, because I forgot to mention that can also be found in github.com/Microsoft Bot Framework-SDK. And again, you can download and install this. If you want to develop locally, instead of going through the Azure option, you can always go locally and actually build your bots from Visual Studio and then publish them. You don't actually have to start with the Azure option. All right. All right, so once you have the Bot Framework installed and the emulator installed, I'm going back over to my downloaded EchoBot, and I'm going to go ahead and just run this from IIS locally. So it's going to start a web app for me. And even though we said it has no UI, in this particular template, it does give us a default page. So we know we're seeing something, but in reality, this page means nothing. It's really meant to run this back-end web service that we see right here. All right, so this is the actual address of where the web service lives. So if I copy this URL, what we do is we come over to the Bot Framework when it starts up, and we add a bot configuration to it. So here we can give it a name, call it the DNG EchoBot. I'll point to the URL of where that bot is. You must include the /API messages. This is how the ASP.NET Core framework works with the Bot Framework. It adds this API messages. But if you're familiar with the MVC pattern and controllers, you can control that yourself, right, if you want to. And then the other interesting part about this is this bot, because we downloaded it from Azure, it has certain set of security already applied to it. So that security requires an app ID and a password. And that's why we need to go back to that app settings file. So now we come back over here to our app settings JSON file, and here's the app ID and password. I'll copy the app ID, and I'll copy the password. And I'll go ahead and just save the content and connect. And what this does is this connects up to that bot in a new window. And at this point, if I restart the conversation, right, it like bumps into the service and says hello, and the service initiates, adds me into as a member to the conversation, and basically allows me to interact with it. And now we're testing this bot with the emulator locally. So here's what's cool about the Bot Emulator. It allows me to see all the messages that are going to and from the system, and any post messages and any error messages that come back, right? It's kind of like a man in the middle that can track the data that's going back and forth. This works with local services, and this also works with Azure services or any other services from any other cloud provider. For example, if you wanted to connect up to any other service, all you have to do is just punch in the URL, give it a name. If that service requires an app ID and a secret, punch those two in and connect, and that's it. Now, there's one caveat to that. The one caveat is whenever you're working with services that are in the public domain or in the internet, this tool behind the scenes uses a special tunneling software that you can see and read about. They may have hit all of that. Up here it is. It uses ngrok as a TCP tunneling software to allow it to connect through firewalls and do different things to do direct connection to those web bot endpoints or web bot URLs. So you sometimes, now in previous versions of this bot framework, you actually had to go out and install the latest version of ngrok for this to work. But in the most recent updates to the Bot Emulator, I think they included this, I think, or maybe not. Maybe you still have to install it. Let me see. Well, actually, it's not good test. But the ngrok software is something that you can download and you can install. It'll connect to it, it'll find it, and then it will communicate with web bots that are in the public domain, right? So anything that's outside your peripheral space there. So that means yes, including Azure APIs that you're connected to, or any other cloud provider, anything outside of what's on your system, it's going to go through this ngrok engine. All right, so I want to make sure you guys were aware of that. All right, so with that, now that we have something that we can kind of really sink our teeth into as far as what's happening, I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint in my code and kind of just show you what you are playing with here. So I'm going to set a breakpoint in my onMessage activity async, and we'll come back over to our bot emulator, and I'll type in another command. I'll just say command. And notice here, it hits my breakpoint in my code that's running locally, and you can see that the turn context is set. You can see the data that came in was command, and you can see that in this case, I'm replying something appropriately, right? Now, this is where I want to introduce you to where the complexity can begin. We're just processing text right here. All this whole setup, everything we've done, going into Azure, provisioning the environment, provisioning resource groups, provisioning the service, choosing the template, and then just getting it set up in Azure was one thing. But now, as a developer, we have a framework, and look at all of the files that you are provided as a developer for a framework for building a bot. At the end of the day, if you think about it, it's just a web page with no UI, right? If you think about this, you might say to yourself, gee, I could build a web page with no UI easily, right? It's just text that goes back and forth. But if you were developing an application that needed to process the words hi versus hello versus welcome versus hola versus bien and whatever, all the different languages you could possibly speak and all the different ways you could say hi, what's happening, what's going on, what's up, right? All the different ways you could say simply hi. Can you envision how much code you would write right here just to figure out if someone is saying hi or not? As you could tell, the complexity and the if and else logic, excuse me, and the switch branches that you might have, select cases, whatever you want to call it, could be humongous, right? It becomes very hard to process phrases. For the very basic stuff, if you know everybody's always going to use a certain syntax, a certain speech all the time, yeah, of course, hard-coded here, you're fine. But the minute you need a repository or database of phrases that you need to juggle against or match against, the minute you have logic that needs to say, okay, he said hello, but was it really hello or was it something else, right? The minute you have that little bit of hesitation where you have all these different derivatives of the word hi and you can't code to it without having 10,000 lines of code, that's when you need to branch into natural language processing. So let's stop with this design because this is very basic, and let's talk about natural language processing. So again, remember, we talked about this early on. Natural language processing, Natural language processing is a way in which we can just take regular English, regular phrases, whatever you utter, and that becomes a phrase, and the system is smart enough to determine what its intent is and figure out what entity that intent belongs to. And it develops a relationship between the verbs and the nouns and the adjectives to try and figure out what the user is actually trying to say and what you're trying to do. So that's very important that you understand when we talk about language understanding and natural language processing, that this concept of a phrase, this concept of an intent, and this concept of an entity. Okay? So how do we use Lewis and how does it all fit together? Well, to use Lewis, it's a service inside of Azure. So first thing we have to do is provision it. So we're going to open up the portal again, and I'm going to choose my account. And I'm going to switch to the directory that actually has subscriptions.
I'm always seeing Bing.
You're not seeing my page? Anybody else not seeing my page?
Yeah, we're
No, I see,
seeing
like, lilacs or something.
beautiful vista with lake and
Yeah.
flowers and mountains.
It's gorgeous, yeah.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Now we see you.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, that's it.
So did you, okay, whatever. What did you miss?
Just this.
Okay, very good.
Well,
So
30
here-
minutes ago, sorry.
Rewind.
Go ahead.
So here we go. So in Portal, we have the ability of creating a Lewis resource. So we click on create a resource, type in language, if I could spell language, there it is, understanding, and we'll click on create. And what's interesting about Lewis is a full platform for different members on the team doing different things. So you may have somebody that's all about, well, let me take a step back. So natural language requires a little bit of work. In order for the system to really understand intents and entities and anything you throw at it, it's going to take some work. And when I say work, that means it's going to take some examples that you got to give it, that it's got to learn from. And someone's got to be there to kind of like moderate and curate what that information is over time, figure out what's good, figure out what's bad, throw out what's bad, and keep what's good. And it literally builds a natural language processing machine learning algorithm and then publishes that algorithm as a service that you can use, in this case, with our bot service or with any application, right? It doesn't have to be our bot. It could be a desktop app. It could be a web page. It could be anything you want that utilizes this service. So when I say it takes a little bit of work, meaning there's different people doing different things. There's a person that's moderating the phrases that are coming in. There's someone that's authoring new potential intents and phrases, okay? And then, of course, there's the prediction part, which is the main piece that you want to use it for, okay, which is the API part of it. So because we have these different people doing different things, authoring or moderating and curating, then you have the ability of having two different endpoints for two different teams. And that's kind of what this is really talking about. Do you want to only create the endpoint for authoring? Because maybe all you want to do is just build a bunch of phrases and intents and actions and package them up and share them for other people and let them import them into their system. I mean, maybe that's a model you have for a business, or maybe you need them both. And that's what this first thing is asking us here. Next thing we want to do is choose our subscription, of course, choose our resource group that we created and give it a name. So let's say we want to build a system that allows the system to understand how to tell jokes. So I'll call it Tell Me a Joke. And we'll come over here and choose the US West. This is the only environment that's available for Lewis right now. And the pricing tier for authoring. And then at the bottom down here, the pricing tier for the prediction API, the main thing that you are using. Click on Review and Create, and create. Now what that does is that provisions all of the necessary services in the Azure space in the case of if it needs to spin up different computers that run your API, right? Because remember, it's going to be a service at the end of the day that runs, but the training in the model now, that's a different engine that's not necessarily right here. So the next step we have to do is we actually have to train a model for Tell Me a Joke. So the way we do that is we must go into the Lewis system itself. This is the brains behind it all. So this takes a different URL. This is www.lewis.ai. Why they didn't just put it all in one banner under Azure Portal? It's because the Lewis team was created a while ago, and they were really going down a different path, and now they're kind of coming back to the Azure land. So it's just that they were disjointed, and eventually they will merge in some form of fashion. So if you've never been to this site, lewis.ai, you got to sign in. You can sign in preferably with your same Azure account, especially if you want to be able to access the same resources available. You need to sign in with your same Azure account. All right, so the first thing it's going to ask me is what subscription that I want to use. And then the next thing it's going to ask me is, okay, we just created some Azure, we created an Azure environment for us to spin up servers and services and do all the Azure stuff. Which one of those do I want to use? So the one I created apparently is taking its time to load up because it's not being shown. It does take a second from time to time for it to pull up. I did choose this subscription. Anyway, all right, fine. The tell me a joke should have pulled up here. This is a different one I made earlier just to make sure Lewis was running. But if it doesn't show right away, it's just taking time to provision, and eventually it connects up. All right, but for time's sake, I'll use the one I created earlier. So here, we're going to use the Azure subscription. We're going to use the authoring resource, and we're going to create a new app for this conversation. And by the way, you have the ability of importing these intents and entities and actions. They can be packaged up, and you can import them as either a JSON file or as what's called an LU file. And both of these allow you to import them. So that means if you can import them, whatever you build here, you can also export them. All right, so that's good to know, because people ask all the time, well, how do we put this inside of DevOps? Well, you export it and put it inside DevOps. That's it. That's how it works. And everything that you see me do graphically, of course, there are APIs that you can use. There's PowerShell scripts and commandlets that you can use to do this automatically, right? There's nothing here in the UI I can't do through some PowerShell. So we'll create a new app here, and we'll call this app Tell Me Another Joke, because the first one was a joke on me, didn't work. Give it a description. Telling jokes, and then the prediction resource. So now it's available. That's funny. All right. So once the app gets created, the next thing we have is this idea of an intent. The easiest way to understand an intent is it's an action. Is whatever the person intends. So for tell me a joke, we really only have one intent. What, pray tell, do you think that is? Anybody? Anybody want to take a guess? If I have a bot that I wanted to tell me a joke, what do I think?
Make me laugh.
Make me laugh. Okay, there we go. Make me laugh. That works. Tell me a joke. Exactly. Now, the intent is the action. So this winds up being just a method, in lack of a better word, in your code. Right, or an operation in your service. It's really just what is the action that we want it to do. Now, what's interesting about this action is how we get to the action. What are the different ways that we can utter a phrase that tells the system what it means to make me laugh? So this is where the training comes in, and this is where one of your roles would be somebody is typing in a bunch of commands and they're trying to figure out all different possible ways that would mean make me laugh. So obviously the first one might be make me laugh. Okay, and you just type in here, tell me a joke. Anybody else have any ideas on what might be something you can say to a system verbally that means tell me a joke?
I'm feeling blue.
Knock, knock, knock.
Knock, knock. Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
Knock, knock. I'm feeling blue. Okay. You also want to train it with things that don't make sense, such as give me a hamburger or turn off the lights. Okay. And the more examples you can give, you typically need about 10 or 15, but the more examples you can give, the better the prediction will be. So as you type in these different things, what winds up happening here is it's trying to build a relationship, okay? So let's take a step back now and talk a little bit about entities before I finish this concept on intents. So what if I want the system to be a little bit smarter than simply tell me a joke? What if I wanted to tell me different types of jokes? What if I wanted to tell me, I don't know, dad jokes or mom jokes or naughty jokes, right? I can choose an entity that allows me to figure out what the category of jokes is. Are you guys following me? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So what we could do is we can create an entity, and maybe that entity is simply like a type of joke. Maybe that's the entity type. Okay. And in this case, we have different types of entities we can create. We can create entities based off of a list of data, entities based off of regular expressions, or the pattern any that I always forget what that means, or one that's called machine learn, which is your simple one. And you can create complex ones. That's the one that you see in the example here. If we were doing some book of flight phrase, here someone could say, book 2 adult business tickets to Airbury Airport, right? And in this scenario, it would take 2 as the number of tickets, and adult as the passenger class entity, and business as the travel class entity, and all 3 of these together represent a ticket order entity, right? So this is a composite pattern that basically, when this phrase comes in, it extracts out the number 2, the word adult, and the word business, and applies them to these parameters or properties of the ticket order class, let's say. So this ticket order class then gets passed in to your service or your client as this is what the system thinks the person said. It thinks they said they want to book a flight with 2 tickets with business class for adults going to this location, right? That's how you can get way more complex than that, but that's a good example of explaining what entities allow you to do. Now, what's interesting about all of this is that, yes, you could type a bunch of these, but there are also some pre-built entities and intents and phrases that are already out there. So notice there's some with calendar, there's some with communication, there's some with email and home automation and different things of that nature, and places in to-do. So let's say I want to add in the, I don't know, the to-do domain. So when I add in the to-do domain, it adds in more intents here that deal with to-do. So again, these wind up being just like functions or actions that the system can understand. So if someone says, let's see what to-do add to-do says. So when someone says, remind me to meet my teacher, that's a to-do action. And it'll recognize this phrase to be the to-do add to-do action. Okay. All right. So going back to make me laugh. So once we've done that, now we can add to these examples and say, tell me a funny joke. We could say, make me, I don't know, love my dad. Maybe that's a joke to make you love your dad, right? Or something along that lines. So then another person would come in here and they would say, well, when I see the word dad, dad is actually an entity, and it is a type of joke entity. And funny is an entity, and it is also a type of joke entity. Okay, blue might be considered an entity. All right, and it might be a type of joke. Tell me a sad joke type of entity, right? Knock knock could be, but it's not, right? And tell me a joke doesn't have an entity, and make me laugh doesn't necessarily have an entity. right? But the idea is that all of these phrases together would help us figure out the intent of make me laugh. All right, so the more and more entries you have here, the smarter and smarter the system can become. So when you click on train, it literally tries to build a relationship using the natural language processing machine learning engine and the machine learning algorithm. And at that point, it's good. And then you can come over here and test it. So if you were to try this out, so if you were to take your bot, make a call into this Lewis service, right, you could send in the phrase, tell me a bad joke. And what this will say is, this says it's a 78% chance that this phrase, the system thinks this phrase is a make me laugh intent, okay? And it thinks that the word bad happens to be a type of joke. So we could try another one. I want to hear funny stuff about my dad. Now, we didn't say anything like this. Let's see what this predicts. So it's a 0.08% of it thinks it's make me laugh, right? So it's a very low percentage. That's not good. But again, that's fine. We're just trying to understand what's happening here. And then when we click on it, notice it doesn't think it's any entity whatsoever. And this is all the information that it's giving me. It's also telling me the sentiment and what the sentiment score might be. So when it's black like this black is basically saying, well, you know, we didn't do so good. So what you might want to do is you might want to look at that intent again, and you might want to maybe test it out again. Or maybe what you want to do is, maybe what you really want to do is you want to retrain it based off of what it is that you just typed or you just trained, right? So, and I'm getting lost here. Let me go back to test again. And I'm going to do something, start the car. Okay. So notice here, start the car is a 0.02, so that's not good. All right, so I'm going to click on this. And for the, I want to hear funny stuff about my dad, I'm going to add this to the make me laugh. So I'm going to purposely tell it that it is correct. Okay. And then for, I don't think we can add the entity here. Used to be a version you could do that. Now for this one, I'm going to purposely tell it for start the car that it is not a make me laugh. It's actually none. Okay. So you also want to train it with negative examples as well. All right. So now, once we've done that, we can retrain it again. And the more and more you do this, obviously, the less and less the error threshold goes down, the errors go down, and the better your system winds up becoming. All right. And the beauty behind all of this behind the scenes is every time your service, your EchoBot service or your client, whoever calls this little service, every time it sends it in, if it can't figure it out, it's available right here in your settings, in your test settings, right? Where you can improve the app performance by going back into it afterwards, retraining it. Someone comes back in, moderates it, purposely says this is not correct, this one is correct, right? And makes it better and better over time. So that's what I mean by it's actually some more work that someone has to do. And it's like there's actually maintenance that you need to keep up with. But the point is that that's really it as a developer trying to take advantage of Lewis. All right. So now going back to my code. So what's next? So once we've gotten an environment that we're comfortable with, the next thing we want to do is we want to publish this out. So you could publish it to a staging slot or a production slot. We want to publish it to production. And once your service has been published, it's now available for you to use inside of whatever service you want. Now, the way you use it is, here's an example of how you make a query into it, right? It gives you an example right here. You're going to need the primary key. You're going to need the app ID for the service, and the URL of where the service lives. So you can get all of those settings, I believe. Here is where you get your app ID. And that's where you get your app ID. This is where you get your key. And then this is your URL. So you need those three: the app ID, the key, and the URL. So if we come back over to the portal, okay. This service should be linked. The Azure service that we created earlier here in the portal should be linked to that service. And I always get lost where the configuration files are. Is it properties? Anyway, there's another setting here that I think I got to click somewhere extra that allows you to see the app settings that you need that are connected to the Lewis Azure settings that are over here, right? Which is, again, your primary key, your app ID, and the URL, which is this guy right here. All right, so once you have those three settings, now you come back over to whatever app that you'd like to incorporate this functionality in, and I'll show you one that I have already prepared. And inside of your app settings here, this is in your app settings, you would give whatever the app ID is. You need your app key. And it doesn't matter if it's the primary or secondary. And then, of course, the URL of where your endpoint lives. All right, so once that is set inside of your bot, the next thing you need to do is you need to come down to your startup file and you need to bring in like all the Lewis content. So the way you get to your Lewis content is it's a NuGet package. So you just need to bring in the cognitive services Lewis package. And then once that package gets brought in, you will have access to something out here called the Lewis Recognizer class, which is right here, this little block of code. Right? So there's something called a Lewis application. And what this does is this points to the Lewis service that's running in lewis.ai with the app ID, key, and endpoint. And then this Lewis app allows you to then create something called a Lewis Recognizer. And what a Lewis Recognizer is basically when you send the text into the recognizer, it comes back with that percentage that I told you right now, and I'll show you in a second. And so this creates the recognizer, and now this recognizer is available for anywhere in your bot that you'd like to use it. So now at that point, if we come back over to a bot, we have the ability of getting reference to that Lewis Recognizer. And then on any of our async methods that we want, such as the on message async or on turn async or any of these asyncs that we want to listen for, right? We can listen out for that Lewis Recognizer, here it is down here, by passing in the turn context information, which is the text of what came in from the system. And then the result that you get back from Lewis winds up being a percentage. And that percentage winds up being the same information that you saw earlier when we were testing it. So if the text that's passed in is turn off the lights, right? Of course, this is incorrect. This is 88%. It thinks that this is an 88% chance of this means make me laugh, which is incorrect. So we can fix that, right? But this is in essence the data that will be returned back, right? It will be the number of 88% will be returned back, and for any other intents that it thinks it is, those will be returned back too. So remember that we added in a bunch of predefined intents. So if we go back here to this version, if you remember when I clicked on intents, I went over here to pre-built domains, and it added these to-do intents, right? So it's possible that something that I send in, some text that's being sent in, it could return any of these intents. So out of these intents, there will be a percentage as to which one it thinks it is. So when I typed in turn on the lights, it thought that it was an 88% chance that this is the intent that the user was trying to say. So the action of go make me laugh, which is not correct, right? So then we would go in, we would test it, we would tell it it's wrong, and it learns over time. And that's exactly what you get back here in this code right here when it says get the top scoring intent, right? And so in this case, the top scoring intent may be make me laugh. So if the intent is make me laugh, then at that point I can do whatever I want to do, right? Because now I know the person wants to make me laugh. Now here's the beauty behind it. Not only does it give me back the top scoring intent, but it also gives me back the entities. So if I go back here and look at the results, notice here it gives me back a link to all the entities that it thinks it is, right? So I can enumerate over all the entities. Now in this case, I only have one entity, so I could check to see if the entity is type of joke. And then here now I would know what that type of joke value is. It will tell me type of joke is funny, type of joke is sad, type of joke is blue, type of joke is dad, right? And based off of those types of jokes, I could then come down here and do whatever I want to do, because now I know the type of joke and the fact that they want me to tell them a joke. And then I could write the code to do that logic appropriately. And that's it. And that's how you kind of link it all together and build your bots to make it intelligent and work with Lewis. And so I'll kind of come back to the slides. So call to action. So the call to action is pretty straightforward. Download the Bot Framework SDK from GitHub. Download the Bot Emulator. Start playing around with your first bot inside of Azure by creating an Azure account, going to the portal, creating a web bot, your research group first, of course, and then your web bot. And then download the source code. Start making slow changes to it to understand how the message context works, how the turns work, and how the initiation, the members added method works. And then look at the startup class and understand how services are configured. And keep in mind that by default, bots are stateless. They don't remember between one call to the next. So if you need a real dialogue that needs to happen, you need to figure out a way to maintain state, which there are examples to show you how to maintain state between calls. And then once you've done that, deploy it, test it out in the Bot Emulator, and make something remarkable.
That's
so
cool. I'd never seen that Bot Emulator before.
Oh yeah. So one last piece I want to talk about here to add on to that make something remarkable. You're probably asking yourself, well, how do you connect it to things like Alexa or things like Cortana or things like well, Cortana's no more, but things like you know, voice-enabled devices. How do you do that? Well, whenever you have a web bot, your web bot, where is it at? There's this thing down here called channels. Am I in the web bot? Oh, I'm in the app service. There we go. There's this thing right here called channels. And channels give you the ability of linking your bot to other bot ready systems. For example, Cortana was the ones that I use quite often when you want to connect it up to your Cortana device, or when the Cortana piece over here, when you could say, hey, Cortana, and it kind of worked, right? You could connect your bot up to that, and so you could say, hey, Cortana, tell me a joke, or whatever your special keyword was, and it would launch your bot instead of the built-in bot from Cortana. I know Cortana, I shouldn't say Cortana is dead. Let me rephrase that. Cortana is being revamped and being revised to kind of work with Microsoft Graph. So it's going to actually be a little bit better in case of working with the enterprise and working with your schedule and your calendar. So Cortana is changing into something else. So it's not exactly dead, but how it was, it's no more. There's also more channels here, though. There's also the Microsoft Teams channel. There's a direct line channel, so you can hook it up to any webhook mechanism. You can hook it up to if this, then that. You can hook it up to anything that has a webhook designed to it to allow you to connect it to, right? Again, you can hook it up to Alexa. You can hook it up to GroupMe, to Slack, to Twilio, to Skype, to Kik, to Facebook, and to a lot of different systems. So the idea of hooking it up to Teams channel or to Slack is fairly simple. You give it the URL, you give it the app ID in secret, you go into Teams or you go into Slack into the admin page and you say you want to add a new app, you point it to this chatbot, and that's it. And then what happens is in Slack, you can do whatever the key command is in order to access this bot, slash, in this case, DNG Echo Bot, and you could type in the text phrase and that text gets sent from Slack into your bot, or from Teams into your bot, or you could speak it in the case of an Alexa device. So this is how easy it is to build what's called an Alexa skill with Microsoft, right? You just come over here and say, I want to connect my bot to Alexa. You give it you have to have a skill ID from Alexa. You punch that in here, be quiet, Alexa. And then you come over here to the URL of your URL, copy and paste that. You'll have to log in to Alexa itself with the admin's account. And then when you're configuring your apps inside of Alexa, you point it to this URL, and then that's it. And then you could tell it what the key wake-up word is for Alexa to run your app, and then you can just start talking to your bot here. So there's all kind of things that you could do once you've built your bot to make it very easy to connect up to real life components. All right, so make something remarkable. Very cool stuff that you could do. And here I will open the floor for questions and answers.
Any questions? Feel free to turn on your mic, your video, or put a question in the chat. I guess you covered it all.
What's the most complicated bot that you've made using this framework?
Complicated. Well,
what's the largest bot you've made with it?
Oh, so the largest bot I've made at this point has been one that just does a cafe menu. Basically, so at the job I work at, there's a cafe menu that is displayed for all the employees that someone can go to. It's like a website, static website. Every week the menu changes basically. And so if there's like an API that allows you to get what's coming up on the menu. So what we did was we created a bot using the same design here that queries the menu and takes the badge ID from the associate and automatically charges them based off of whatever they want to order. So then that order is then placed into the cafeteria system. So they can basically open up Alexa or open up their phone or open up the computer and say, at the time when Cortana was working, they could go, hey, Cortana, I want to order something from the cafe menu. And then it comes back and provides you a list. It speaks to you. Now, one thing I didn't make mention of here is that depending on the bot that you create, there are also something called cards, adaptive cards that you can send back, which actually does have a UI that brings you back into the 2D development sphere. So you do have the ability when you're working with a chat bot in like a tool like a Skype to actually present pictures back. And that was one of the things we did. We presented the pictures back of what was on the menu, and then the person could then order something off the menu, and then it gives them their badge ID. It basically had two-factor authentication that said, okay, you are so-and-so based off your badge ID. We're going to send you a text message. Tell me the code that we sent you your text message. They give them the code, and then the order is placed, and that's that. That was, for the most part, the most complex. And believe it or not, it wasn't that complex. Now, I've also helped out. I didn't build this next example I'm going to tell you, but I helped someone, I guided someone in building a Q&A chatbot, which was basically, we had a bunch of documents that was stored for various different help services for our help support center. And they needed a Q&A chatbot that they wanted to make. And basically, really, really easy. You use the Q&A maker with a chatbot, upload your documents, and Q&A maker does all the rest. So that one seemed like it was super complex when you look into it, but when you realize the 4 or 5 steps that you need to build it, you're like, oh wow, this was easy. Don't tell anybody.
Okay.
Let's see.
Anything else, anybody? Maybe you should put your contact, yeah, all right. Put your contact information up.
Contact info.
Contact a regional
So
director.
it's a lot. It's pretty intense. Yeah, I've played with the Q&A maker, but not this. And the Q&A maker makes things a little more easy, I think, in my opinion.
Oh yes, definitely. The Q&A maker is more of a graphical designer that, you know, you just basically add a bunch of documents. The tool itself goes out and crawls all the text of the document and basically classifies or puts it in a pattern, in a grouping, all the documents and all the potential questions and answers it could figure out from these documents that you load, and it supports what Word docs and PDF docs and text files. And it's really cool because this is big repository of documentation that the system automatically kind of figures out what someone might ask, and then it ranks those answers back. So as far as the bot is concerned, you know, you may go, hey, I want to learn how to, you know, change my password on a Windows 7 system, right? And if there's documents that your company has made that gave you the internal company steps on how to change your password for Windows 7, it will pull up the document and then chat and step you through chatting the steps to actually, you know, change your password in Windows 7. And there's no real code involved, right? It's just, here's a bunch of docs, and the system figures it all out for you. So very, very easy tool to use for building bots.
Can the Q&A bot read Confluence pages also?
It can read URLs. I don't know if those URLs are dynamic in nature, like Confluence tends to be from time to time. It might give you some issues there, but you could try it. It's really, again, it's really easy. You just punch in a URL, upload a doc, text file, PDF document, Word document, CSV files I think are supported as well, and it just crawls that content.
Cool.
So let's see who I see in the list here. I see Robert on. Rob.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. Still working with JM Family on the mobile project for the VPCs.
Oh, nice.
It's great, though, not having to commute 35 miles to Deerfield Beach.
I bet.
Are you on site?
No. I'm in Boynton. I'm at home.
You're not working on site, though, day to day?
No.
Okay.
I'm one of the lucky ones right now.
Oh, it's great.
Damien was saying that he's going in every day. Is that true?
Well, Damien got let go at the end of April with a bunch of contractors at
Okay.
JM Family.
Okay.
But he's at, I think he's at Nations Health
Yeah.
on site.
Does
Okay.
Breakpoint work at JM?
I'm sorry?
Does Greg Moore still work at JM Family?
I don't know that name, but
Yeah,
Dwight.
Greg's still there.
Oh, I worked with him for like 15 years at a previous company.
Well, does anybody have any more questions on building bots?
No, but thank you for the introduction. It's a little less overwhelming. It actually feels like it's approachable. Thank you.
Oh, cool.
I put
Yep.
a
Thanks,
link to
Dwight.
it.
Yes,
Fantastic.
How can I get access to this recording? Is it just going to show up in my Teams?
No. Well, what do we do with it? Darius, do we take
So-
it
so
and
Meetup?
put it on YouTube?
I need to get David Cobb to post them actually on our website. Links to it from our website, I think, would probably be a good place to place them. We could also upload them, I guess, to the YouTube channel. Would probably be a better place to keep them permanently and to stream it. And we can reference it from the site. I'll coordinate with David Cobb and get all of these Teams meetings posted ASAP. Do you know when he's back in town?
July 6th, he said.
Okay, we'll get it by then, when he comes back.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm gonna stop recording at this point.
Okay.